Hey everybody, Mariazzi here. So I'm sure you've recently seen the latest video of mine regarding the chain selector on the Launchpad X. Many of you throughout my Discord and my comment section have been asking about how I did it and to basically show you guys how to do it as well. Well, in this video, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about that. But before we start, let's remind ourselves what the problem exactly is and why we're trying to solve it. The problem we're trying to fix is related to the new Launchpad X and the new Launchpad Mini models of Launchpads. And the problem itself is that the new Launchpads don't exactly have a way to map a page selector onto them. So even though the Launchpad does have the right side buttons over here, in both of the Launchpad's modes, they're actually useless for us. If we consider live mode and the custom modes, the right hand side is reserved for switching between the different custom modes which you can upload using the Novation Components tab. So in this scenario, they don't even send out any kind of MIDI input signal that we could potentially try and map to the chain selector. However, in programmer mode is where things start to get a little bit interesting. In this mode, the side buttons actually do send out a sort of signal to the computer. However, it's only a control change signal, CC for short, and this value is usually reserved for controls such as knobs and sliders in MIDI devices. Because of that, Ableton's MIDI mapping functionality was not built to map these sort of knobs to a range. Instead, they map the knob itself as a range, since it can range between a value of 0 and 127. In the case of the Launchpad, it'll simply output a 127 if we press the button, and a 0 if we release the button. The most common workaround people found with the Launchpad X almost immediately was to create a max4loud device that transforms these CC values into notes inside of the track. So this won't make Ableton's MIDI mapping service see those CCs as actual notes, but rather it will make just the track input be able to see these and react to them as if they were regular notes. From here, you could use other max4loud based solutions such as Wormhole to directly modify the chain selector, effectively giving you some sort of page swapping. However, it is nowhere close to the real Ableton MIDI mapping that we're all used to. And even then, because we're using the programmer mode, another issue arises. The programmer mode uses a completely different layout than the one we're used to. It uses the XY layout, which instead of going upwards like this over to the top, crossing over to this side, and then over to the side buttons, actually goes across like this, and then up to the next row, and then to the next row. So really, there is no easy way to play all Launchpad projects with page swapping support and even the correct layout without using a bunch of Max4Live converter devices. And this is again bad because now you have the requirement of using Max4Live, which leaves out Live Lite, Live Intro, and Live Standard users, severely limiting what people can do with the Launchpad out of the box. So in my previous video where I showcased how I mapped the chain selector to the Launchpad X, I obviously had to have some kind of proper fix at my hands. And the solution to all of our problems was going to be this one website I made. The website essentially works like this. You select your Launchpad from the drop-down box, and then pick Patch Programmer Mode. Once you hit Update, the website asks you to reconnect your Launchpad in the bootloader mode. So, once you go ahead and do that, the Launchpad will now update, and it'll contain the patches that we created, which brings support to proper covers. That is how simple installing the patch you saw in my previous video was going to be. So this weekend, I had spent pretty much the entire time making a video about this, so that I can make sure that it's as simple as possible for people to understand and install the new firmware. And we even had a meme segment recorded for that video.
What's up, peddlers?
And all of this was gonna be published just today. However, as I woke up this morning, Novation posted version 1.0.4 of their firmware, which introduced something called Legacy Mode. When you update to this new firmware, you'll notice that on the right side there's the new purple LED, which takes you to the new Legacy Mode Novation introduced this morning. This mode is essentially a Launchpadder's wet dream. It's organized with the traditional drum rack layout I was talking about earlier, and has support for sending out note values when you push the side button. That way, it is possible to MIDI map it in Ableton to a proper chain selector. And that's going to be perfect for pretty much everyone to use their Launchpad X with any old existing projects, and continue making new projects in the same way that they're used to before. So what about the patches I made that we're going to release today? Well, now they're pretty much obsolete because of the new firmware coming out, and that kind of sucks considering the amount of effort that went into making these. However, I think it's better that there's an official solution to the problem rather than people having to rely on patches made by some random person that potentially doesn't know what they're doing. So how do my patches work then? How did I manage to enable proper page swapping on the Launchpad X before the official solution came out? Well, even though installing the fix would have been super simple, what happens behind the scenes is very complex, and is the result of over a month's worth of reverse engineering and coding. The way it works is by modifying the code that the Launchpad itself executes by patching parts of the firmware. There are a couple things we had to figure out how to do before we could even think about trying to patch programmer mode to do what we wanted to do. The first thing we had to understand is how the Launchpad actually updates the firmware. The update itself is sent out as systex messages, just like RGB pad set messages are sent out as sysx in Apollo. We figured this out by studying how the Launchpad Pro's custom firmware build system works. The sysx messages used to update the Launchpad X and the Launchpad Pro are very similar, and this allowed us to draw some common conclusions about both devices when analyzing code of one of them. The code which converts the raw firmware binary into sysx is actually open source on Novation's custom firmware repository, so it was just a matter of reversing what that script does to extract the Launchpad X's binary. From there, we could analyze and understand the disassembly and decompilation of the Launchpad X firmware. But we couldn't actually upload any modifications to the Launchpad just yet, because the Launchpad X employs a checksum value which essentially validates that the firmware sent to the Launchpad is valid and hasn't been tampered with. Luckily, and after a lot of digging and trying to understand the nonsense of the Launchpad X binary, we found that the code for validating the firmware checksum is actually contained inside of the Launchpad X binary itself, because the Launchpad can take in firmware updates while it's not in the bootloader mode. After understanding how the algorithm works, we were able to recreate it externally and generate checksums for our modified firmware files. Shoutouts to Brendonovich for figuring out how the checksum works. At that point, it was a matter of looking through the garbled mess of the disassembly and trying to find where the input and output processing code is. Eventually, and after some guesswork, we had found it. And now it was time to write the patches to convert between the drum rack and XY layouts, as well as disabling CCs on the side buttons and turning them into regular nodes so that they could be properly mapped to page swapping enabled. Essentially injecting our own code into the firmware. So for this we had to find suitable places to inject our code to, and then we had to write the assembly code that would change between the two layouts and enable page swapping. And while there wasn't a lot of assembly involved, we had no prior experience with this and had to basically learn it from scratch just for this one purpose. At that point we had the first working version complete, which was roughly around 2 weeks ago. But to make installing these patches as easy to do as possible, we decided to build the website I showcased earlier, where with just a click of a button you could fix all of the issues with your Launchpad X almost instantly. Shoutouts to Vaaski and Brendonovich for helping me build the website. Fast forward to today, right as we're about to release, Novation drops legacy mode and makes all of this work obsolete. It really does suck to have a lot of work invalidated like that, but we still got a couple good things out of this. First of all, we now have a good understanding about how the Launchpad itself works internally at a very low level, and this should hopefully allow us to continue making these kinds of modifications in the future. First of which on the list is going to be custom color palettes right on the firmware for every RGB Launchpad in existence, and we're going to reuse this website to build that and make it as easy as possible to use. I know most people won't care about this feature too much as they're either using Apollo or they're used to the default palette found on the Launchpads, but I still think it's a nice feature to have and we should be moving away from Max-based solutions such as RedNat as soon as possible. Speaking of moving away from Max, the new website also has support for installing the custom firmware onto your Launchpad Pro, which means that the old Max Flash tool for the Launchpad Pro doesn't need to be used anymore, which I feel is another step in the right direction. If you want to quickly and easily install the new legacy mode feature without having to register for components, you can head over to fw.mariazzi.com right now and update your Launchpad X. And in conclusion, although it seems like it might have been a waste of time to build all of this, hopefully we can salvage the situation and make something that lets you guys use the Launchpads more easily. That's going to be all from me for this video. Thanks for watching and stay cool.